My name is Danielle, I'm 34 years old, and if you had met me a few weeks ago at my brother's wedding, you'd probably have thought I was the unlucky one in the family, the divorced woman without kids, the black sheep sitting quietly in the corner while everyone else strutted around with their picture-perfect lives. That's the role they've always cast me in. But what none of them knew that night is that I've been holding on to a secret so big it would shatter every smug little smirk thrown my way. The wedding was in our hometown in Pennsylvania, in this grand but slightly tacky banquet hall my parents insisted on renting because it would look good for the guests. My younger brother, Jason, was marrying a girl named Kelly, and while I was genuinely happy for him, the entire evening felt like one long performance, my parents parading around, bragging about Jason's promotion at the bank, about how Kelly's family was a real catch. And me? I was just there, sitting at a round table with distant relatives, answering the same pitying questions over and over. So, Danielle, any new man in your life? Do you ever think about having children before it's too late? You're so beautiful, it's a shame. Each comment was followed by a tight smile, a tilt of the head, and an exaggerated sigh, as if my life was some sad little tragedy they all enjoyed gossiping about. The worst of it came from my mother. She leaned across the table after her third glass of wine and, in front of half the family, said, "You'll regret this life of yours, Danielle. A woman without a husband or children is nothing." I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I just smiled. A smile they all mistook for defeat. What they didn't realize was that my smile was the mask of someone holding all the power, quietly watching, waiting for the perfect moment to turn the tables. Because while they saw a divorced, childless woman, I knew the truth: I own a company worth $42 million. And the kicker? My money had been keeping them afloat for years. After my mother's words sank in, I sat there with my wine glass in hand, pretending I wasn't stung by them. Inside, though, something shifted. I had been tolerating their judgment for years, letting their words roll off my back because, deep down, I thought maybe that was the price I had to pay for choosing my own path. But that night, in that gaudy hall filled with people who thought they had me figured out, I decided it was the last time I would ever let them speak to me that way. The irony of it all was almost laughable. My parents had no idea how much I'd been doing for them behind the scenes. The family home they so proudly showed off. I had quietly covered their second mortgage when my father lost his job years ago. My brother's dream wedding that Kelly's family supposedly paid for. That bill had been padded with thousands from my personal account because Jason came to me in tears months earlier, embarrassed he couldn't afford it. Even my mother's monthly spa trips and shopping binges, those were courtesy of the company card I had slipped into her wallet under the guise of helping her with errands. And still, they looked at me as though I were some failure. When I got back to my hotel room that night, still in my bridesmaid's dress, I sat on the edge of the bed with my phone in hand and opened up my company's accounts. My thumb hovered over the approval buttons for all the automatic payments I had set up for them, their mortgage, Jason's car note, even the credit card bills my mother never bothered to monitor. It would be so easy to stop it all. Just one click. That was the moment I decided I was done. Done funding their fake perfect lives. Done being the silent benefactor while they ridiculed me to my face. The next week, when I was back in New York, I canceled every single payment. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. The fallout didn't take long. It was exactly 6 days after the wedding when the first call came in. I was sitting in my New York apartment, sipping coffee by the window, the city humming below me, when my phone lit up with Jason's name. Normally, I would have ignored it, but I was curious. "Danielle," he said without even saying hello, his voice tight with panic. "Mom and Dad's mortgage payment didn't go through. Do you know what's going on? They said the bank is threatening to report them if it happens again." I almost laughed at how quickly the mask of stability had cracked. But I kept my tone calm, casual. "Oh. That's strange," I said. "Maybe they should call the bank." He hesitated. "Yeah, but you usually handle these things. Didn't you?" I cut him off. "Not anymore, Jason. I've decided I'm stepping back. Everyone seems to think I've made a mess of my life, so I figured I shouldn't interfere in theirs. There was a long silence. Wait, are you saying you're cutting them off? He asked, his voice rising. I'm saying, I replied firmly, it's time everyone stood on their own 2 feet. The line went dead a few seconds later. By the following week, the calls multiplied. My mother rang me daily, sometimes leaving voicemails full of venom, sometimes of desperation. One day it was, how could you abandon your family like this? You're cruel. The next it was, Danielle, please, just help with this one bill and I promise we'll talk about things. But the one that truly shook me came from my father. His voice was quieter, almost broken. Sweetheart, your mom is panicking. We didn't realize how much we were relying on you. Maybe we should talk. For a moment, I almost felt guilty. Almost. But then I remembered sitting at that wedding table, my mother's words cutting through me like glass. A woman without a husband or children is nothing. No. I wasn't nothing. And they were about to learn exactly who I was without my money cushioning their lives. Once the calls and messages turned from anger to desperation, I did something I hadn't done in years. I turned my phone off and left it in a drawer. No buzzing reminders of their chaos, no guilt-inducing voicemails, no pressure to fix problems I didn't create. Just silence. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe. My life in New York had always been full, but I'd never really allowed myself to enjoy it. I was too busy running my company, paying everyone else's bills, and trying to keep up the illusion that my family was stronger than it really was. Now, with that weight off my shoulders, I started to live for myself. I threw myself into my work, not out of obligation, but with passion. My company, a tech consultancy firm I had built from the ground up, was about to sign a huge deal with a major corporation. I started spending more time at the office, not because I had to, but because I wanted to see my vision expand. Every meeting felt electric, every new hire reminded me that I had built something real, something lasting. But I didn't stop at work. I began reclaiming pieces of my personal life that I had abandoned. I signed up for a yoga class in Soho. I started going to brunch with friends on Sundays, laughing until my cheeks hurt. I even went on a few dates, nothing serious yet, but for the first time in years, I wasn't dreading the idea of opening my heart again. One evening, as I sat on my rooftop with a glass of wine, watching the lights of the city flicker like stars, it hit me, I wasn't defined by what my family thought of me. I wasn't the divorced woman without children. I was Danielle, strong, independent, wealthy, and finally, free. And as I leaned back in my chair, I knew this was only the beginning. The silence between my family and me didn't last long. By the 3rd week after I cut them off, their world had already started to unravel, and they made sure I knew it. Jason was the first to crack. He showed up at my office unannounced, his tie loosened, his face red with frustration. I had my assistant hold him in the lobby until I could step out. Danielle, this isn't funny anymore, he said, almost spitting the words. The wedding bills are piling up. Kelly's furious, the credit cards are maxed, and Mom and Dad are saying it's my fault. I folded my arms, keeping my face neutral. Maybe because it is your fault, Jason. You wanted the big wedding. You wanted the show. And you relied on me to cover the mess without anyone knowing. Now you have to deal with it. He looked stunned, like no one had ever dared say those words to him. You don't understand, he stammered. Kelly married me thinking I had everything together. If she finds out, then she'll know the truth, I interrupted. That you've been living a lie. Just like the rest of them. He stormed out, muttering something under his breath, but I knew the panic was real. A few days later, my mother called again, this time sobbing so loudly I could barely understand her. Your father and I are fighting every night, she cried. He says I spend too much, I say he doesn't earn enough, it's tearing us apart. Danielle, you can't do this to us. I didn't respond. I let her words hang in the air and ended the call. Because deep down, I knew what was happening. without my money smoothing over every crack. The perfect image they'd spent years polishing was finally breaking apart. And for once, I didn't feel guilty. I felt vindicated. This was their reckoning. The whispers started slowly, but I knew how my family operated. Gossip spread like wildfire, and it wasn't long before the extended relatives got involved. My Aunt Carol was the first one to reach out. She called me on a Sunday morning, her tone syrupy sweet in a way that made my stomach turn. "Danielle, honey," she began, "I heard some things. Your mom says you've abandoned the family, left them high and dry. Is that true?" I nearly laughed. "Funny," I said, considering I'd been secretly paying their bills for years while they mocked me to my face. There was a pause, and I could almost hear her brain ticking. "Wait, you paid for the house? And Jason's wedding?" "Anne." "Yes," I cut her off. "Every big expense they bragged about came from me. Not them. Me." Silence. Then, with a sigh, she muttered, "Well, that explains a lot." It didn't take long for the rest of the family to hear the truth. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. Where my mother had painted me as selfish and heartless, relatives were now calling her ungrateful and deceitful. At a family gathering I wasn't invited to, but heard plenty about afterward, my cousin Rachel apparently confronted my parents directly. "You let Danielle bankroll your lives while you sat there tearing her down. Do you have any idea how pathetic that sounds?" My mother, predictably, lost her temper. She shouted that I had humiliated them by exposing their dependence, that I was trying to ruin the family's reputation. But the damage was done. For once, the whispers weren't about me, they were about them. And the best part? I didn't have to lift a finger. They had written their own downfall, I had simply stepped out of the way. The call I'd been waiting for came late one evening, just as I was finishing a glass of wine after work. It was Kelly, my brother's new wife. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, which immediately told me she was furious. "Danielle," she said, "I need to ask you something. Did you pay for our wedding?" I leaned back in my chair, swirling the wine in my glass. "Mostly," I said. "Jason came to me months before, said he couldn't cover the costs. I didn't want to embarrass him, so I handled it quietly." Silence. Then a sharp intake of breath. "So when he told me his bonus covered it, when he bragged to my parents about being financially stable, he was lying?" "Yes." Her laugh was short, bitter. "God, I knew something was off. The bills are stacking up now, and he's panicking. He told me it was all a mistake, that the bank messed up." She paused. "But it wasn't, was it? You cut them off." "I did," I admitted. "I got tired of being mocked for not having the kind of life they wanted for me while I was secretly funding theirs. Enough was enough." For a moment, she said nothing. Then, in a low voice, she whispered, "Thank you for telling me the truth. I wish I had heard it sooner." I didn't ask what she meant, but I didn't have to. 2 weeks later, I heard through the grapevine that Kelly had moved out of their apartment. She'd taken half her things and gone to stay with her parents. Jason, apparently, had been begging her to come back, but the trust was broken. Their perfect marriage, the one my family had celebrated like it was the crown jewel, was already cracking at the seams. And deep down, I couldn't help but think, this was only the beginning. By the time Kelly left Jason, my parents were in full-blown desperation mode. The angry voicemails had turned into pitiful ones, and then, finally, into what I could only describe as manipulation. One night, around 10 p.m., my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. "We need to talk. Your father isn't well. Stress is ruining his health. If you still care about this family, you'll help us." For a second, I just stared at the screen. It was classic her, weaponizing guilt to pull me back into their orbit. A few hours later, my father called too. His voice was weaker than usual, deliberate. "Danielle," he said, "I don't want to pressure you, but your mother is right. Things are bad. The mortgage, the bills, it's all piling up. And the stress, well, I've been having chest pains. The doctor says I need to avoid it. I close my eyes, remembering the man who raised me, stern but steady, proud in that quiet way dads are. And then I remembered the wedding, the way he sat beside my mother while she told me I was nothing. He didn't defend me. He never did. So I asked him a question I had never dared to before. Dad, when Mom said I was worthless at Jason's wedding, did you agree with her? There was a long pause. Too long. Finally, he muttered, she didn't mean it like that. You know how she is. And that was my answer. I took a deep breath and said, if you want less stress, then stop living a lie. Sell the house. Cut the expenses. Live within your means. I'm done fixing this family. Before he could respond, I hung up. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. They weren't sick. They weren't victims. They were manipulators grasping at their last card, and I wasn't about to play along. The cracks in my family's facade weren't private anymore. What had once been whispered behind closed doors was now spilling out into the open for everyone to see. It started with their house. Without my payments covering the mortgage, late notices began stacking up. Eventually, a foreclosure sign appeared on the lawn. In a small Pennsylvania town, that kind of thing doesn't stay quiet. Neighbors who once envied my parents' perfect life, now whispered as they drove by, slowing down just enough to stare. Then came the social fallout. My mother, who loved nothing more than her weekly luncheons with her circle of friends, suddenly stopped going. Word spread that she had been embarrassed. Apparently one of the women confronted her about rumors that I had been the real source of the family's wealth. My mother, in typical fashion, denied it, but the truth had already taken root. My father fared no better. A man who once boasted about being the rock of the family now looked hollow. I heard from Aunt Carol that he'd started drinking more, showing up to the local bar in the afternoons, muttering about ungrateful kids and losing everything. And Jason, well, Jason's downfall was the loudest. With Kelly gone, he had no buffer. He began showing up at family gatherings alone, defensive and angry. At one dinner, I heard he exploded at a cousin who dared to bring up how lucky he'd been to have me helping him all those years. He stormed out, slamming the door like a child. For once, the spotlight of shame wasn't on me, it was on them. Their empire of appearances had collapsed, and the people they'd worked so hard to impress were now watching them unravel. I didn't gloat publicly. I didn't need to. Just knowing that the truth had finally surfaced was enough. And in New York, far away from the mess, I felt lighter than ever. It was a rainy Thursday evening when my mother showed up unannounced at my office in New York. I was finishing up a meeting when my assistant buzzed me, her voice uncertain. Danielle, there's a woman here. She says she's your mother. Do you want me to send her away? My first instinct was to say yes. To protect the peace I'd carved out for myself. But something in me stirred, curiosity, maybe even closure. So I told my assistant to let her in. When my mother walked through the door, she looked nothing like the woman I had last seen at Jason's wedding. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes wrinkled, her face pale with exhaustion. She wasn't the polished, sharp-tongued matriarch anymore, she looked beaten. Danielle, she began, her voice trembling. I didn't know where else to go. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. You could have gone to Jason. Or to Dad. Or to the dozens of relatives who used to sing your praises. Her lips pressed together, her eyes brimming. They won't help. No one will. Everyone knows the truth now. And it's all falling apart. She took a shaky breath. I was wrong about you. About everything I said at the wedding. You're not nothing. You're the only one who ever held us together. I let the silence stretch, watching her squirm. A year ago, I would have melted at those words. I would have rushed to comfort her, to take the burden back on my shoulders. But not now. You want me to fix this, I said flatly. Her eyes darted up, hopeful. Yes. Please, Danielle. We're drowning. If you could just. I raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. No. Her face crumpled, as if the word itself broke her. I'm not your safety net anymore, Mom. I'm not here to fund your lies or absorb your cruelty. You made your bed. Now you can lie in it. And with that, I stood, signaling to my assistant to see her out. It was the hardest conversation I'd ever had. But it was also the most freeing. It didn't take long for the news to reach Jason. 2 days after I turned my mother away, I got a call from him. Unlike the panicked tone I'd heard before, this time his voice was laced with pure anger. So that's it, he snapped the second I answered. Mom came all the way to New York, and you threw her out like trash. I stayed calm. She came to me begging for money, Jason. Just like you always do. And I said no. That's not cruelty, that's boundaries. Boundaries, he scoffed. She's our mother, Danielle. She gave you everything, and now you're. I cut him off. She didn't give me everything. She gave me ridicule. She gave me shame. At her precious wedding toast, she told me I was nothing. Do you remember that, Jason? Did you defend me? No, you laughed along with the rest of them. He went silent for a moment, caught off guard. Then his voice rose again, desperate this time. Look, I get it, she was harsh. But she's still Mom. And without you, they're going to lose everything. Do you really want that on your conscience? I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. Jason, for years I carried all of you on my back. I paid for the house, the cars, even your damn wedding. And what did I get in return? Nothing but mockery. Now that the truth is out, you all want to pretend I'm heartless for stepping away. But I'm not the problem, you are. His breathing grew heavy on the other end. Finally, he muttered, you'll regret this. I almost laughed at the irony. Funny, I said softly. That's exactly what Mom told me at your wedding. And look where that got her. Then I hung up. For the first time, Jason knew I wasn't bluffing. I wasn't coming back. Jason's unraveling came faster than even I expected. Without my quiet financial support holding him up, his carefully curated image collapsed in on itself. First, it was his marriage, or what was left of it. Kelly filed for divorce within a month of moving out. I didn't hear the details directly, but word traveled fast through the family grapevine. She cited deception and financial instability. In other words, she finally realized she'd married a fraud. Then came his job. Jason had built his career at the bank on reputation, selling himself as a responsible, upstanding man with a solid family life. But banks don't take kindly to scandal, especially when your personal finances start bleeding into your work. Rumors spread that he'd taken out loans he couldn't repay, all while pretending to be living comfortably. Eventually, the bank let him go, quietly, to avoid embarrassment. Unemployed, divorced, and drowning in debt, Jason moved back into our parents' house. The same house that was now weeks away from foreclosure. Aunt Carol told me she saw him one afternoon, standing on the porch in a wrinkled shirt, cigarette dangling from his hand, glaring at the neighbors as if their pity were knives. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered how he used to laugh at me during holidays, chiming in with Mom's remarks about me ending up alone. I remembered how he took my money with one hand and mocked me with the other. Now he was the one alone. And for once, I wasn't the one holding him up. I didn't reach out. I didn't offer help. Jason had made his choices, just like the rest of them. And now he was paying the price. Meanwhile, in New York, my life was thriving more than ever. For years, I had carried the weight of my family's secrets alone. Nobody in New York really knew the full story. My friends and colleagues just assumed I was a private person who didn't talk much about her relatives. And that was true, but not because I didn't want to talk. It was because every time I thought about telling someone, the the shame would rise in my throat like poison. But one night, over dinner with my friend and business partner, Emily, I finally let it out. We were at a quiet little restaurant in the West Village, sipping cocktails after a long day at work. Emily had known me for nearly a decade. She'd seen me through the divorce, through sleepless nights building the company, through everything, except my family. "You've been glowing lately," she said, half smiling over her glass. "It's like you dropped 20 pounds of stress. What's going on?" I hesitated, then laughed softly. "It's funny you say that, because in a way, I did. I dropped my entire family." Emily blinked. "Wait, you what?" And just like that, the words started pouring out. I told her everything, about funding my parents' mortgage, Jason's wedding, my mother's cruelty at the reception, and the moment I finally pulled the plug on all of it. I admitted how guilty I had felt at first, and how liberating it became once I realized their downfall wasn't mine to prevent. Emily listened silently, her eyes wide, her hand occasionally brushing mine in reassurance. When I finally finished, I felt drained, but also lighter than I had in years. "You know what, Danny?" she said firmly. "That's not cruelty. That's survival. You gave them more than anyone else ever would have. And they threw it in your face. You're not heartless, you're free." Her words settled into me like a balm. For the first time, I didn't just know I was right, I felt it. And in that moment, surrounded by clinking glasses and quiet chatter, I realized I had finally told my truth. And it felt damn good. By the time summer rolled around, my family had hit rock bottom, and I didn't even hear it from them. I heard it from the outside world. It was a Monday morning when Aunt Carol called, her voice brimming with the kind of energy people get when they're the first to deliver news. "Danielle," she said, "I don't know if you've heard, but the house is gone. Bank took it last week." I leaned back in my chair, letting the words wash over me. The house was their pride and joy, the symbol they clung to whenever they wanted to prove to the world that they had it all. Now, stripped away. Carol went on, clearly enjoying the gossip. "Your parents are renting a tiny apartment near the highway. Jason's with them too, looks miserable. People are talking, Danny. Everyone knows the truth now." I could picture it perfectly, my mother, once queen of the neighborhood, forced to live in a cramped space with peeling paint and no room for her endless clothes. My father, drowning in shame every time he bumped into someone from his old life. Jason, jobless and bitter, sulking in the corner like the child he'd never grown out of being. The fall was complete. Later that week, I bumped into an old family acquaintance in Manhattan, a woman who had once attended our holiday parties back in Pennsylvania. She gave me a look of pity and said, "I heard what happened to your folks. Terrible, isn't it?" I smiled politely and replied, "They'll figure it out." But inside, I felt a quiet, steady satisfaction. For once, the disaster wasn't mine to carry. They had mocked me for being nothing. Now the world saw the truth. Without me, they were the ones with nothing. And I still had everything. Months passed, and the noise of my family's collapse faded into the background. The calls stopped, the gossip quieted, and for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't tethered to their drama. I woke up every morning in my New York apartment, sunlight pouring in through the windows, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace. With the weight of their expectations gone, I finally had the freedom to imagine a future that belonged only to me. My company was thriving, we closed the biggest deal in our history that fall, and I rewarded my team with bonuses that made them cry at the holiday party. For once, generosity felt good, because it was going to people who appreciated it. But life wasn't just about work anymore. I traveled. I spent a week in Italy, wandering through vineyards and laughing with strangers over glasses of wine. I went to California to hike the cliffs over Big Sur, feeling the wind whip through my hair as I stood at the edge of the world. And somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking of myself as divorced and childless, like my mother had sneered. I thought of myself as independent, adventurous, alive. And then, unexpectedly, love found me again. A man named Mark, a fellow entrepreneur I met at a conference in Boston. He was kind, driven, and most importantly, he saw me for exactly who I was, not for what I could provide. We took things slow, but every moment felt easy, natural. One evening, as we sat together on my rooftop in Manhattan, watching the skyline glow against the night, he turned to me and said, "You've built an incredible life, Danielle. And the best part? You did it on your own terms." I smiled, because he was right. My family once told me I was nothing. But standing there, free, loved, and successful, I realized I had become everything they could never be: honest, strong, and at peace. For the first time in my life, I wasn't surviving. I was living. And I wouldn't trade that for anything.